So we have a pleasure to have Rav Guttman with us to teach us some beautiful Torah from the Maharal.
Yeah.
Prague.
Yeah. Okay. Recording myself here also. Yeah, it's a real honor to be in such a special place. Mamash, Malcolm Kadisha, a great history, and Alshech himself. Having been here, this is one of the real landmarks of Tzfas, and it's schis to be here. And of course, I was giving for a while shiurim in Koheles in Godsi's house for a while, and I've been doing shiurim for quite a while in various places in Tzfas, and I have a couple of my chevra here that were learning Maharal with me in Kosovo for years, 6 years or something like that. We were learning Be'er HaGoylet. I go back with Maharal quite a few years. I learned through quite a few of the Surim when I lived in Beit Shemesh. And since coming here, we were working on the Sefer Be'er HaGoylet, which is a very sophisticated Sefer, dealing with some of the very difficult passages in Agadata, this kind of thing, very challenging topics. And one thing about the Maharal, he doesn't shy away from anything. He will take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and really go in depth. The Maharal is one of the most amazing figures in Jewish history, in a sense. Of course, he's popularly known as being the creator of the Golem, which I'm not going to talk about the historical aspect of that, but that is certainly something that's been mamish, not only by the Yidden is a very popular story, but it's the Goyim also in Prague. They made a statue of the Maharal. The Goyim also, I think, it's very very important. There was apparently a sefer written by his son, I believe, about it also. So it's anyway. But that's not the major thing. But it does show his importance as a community leader, as defending the community of Prague. There was a very, very large Jewish community in Prague. I had the chance to be in Prague. It was actually in the Alt Shul, which is the shul of Prague. Has interesting history with the Holocaust and everything. The way the Nazis, Dafka, wanted to preserve Prague as a museum of Eastern Jewry, and they left the Alt Shul, mamash untouched, and as well as the Beis HaChaim in back of the Alt Shul, which contains the kever of the Maharal. But at any rate, he was besides being a tremendous community leader, he had a long lifetime. He lived just about, the Arizal lived like in the middle of his lifetime. It was like, he started before and ended afterwards. But he was in a time of tremendous enlightenment, of a kind of Renaissance period. There's a lot of intellectual activity going on in Prague at that time. He knew Tycho Brahe and people like that. The astronomers and the thinkers of his time. He was very, very involved in all this stuff. And at the same time, he is very outspoken, when it comes time to speak against any things in the secular world or in the Christian world or whatever that contradict Yiddishkeit. He was very outspoken. And again, he didn't pull any punches. And some of his svurim are extremely classics that everybody learns. Things like Gura Arya on the page of Rashi. He has Chidusha Godas on the Gadat of the Shas. He has Be'er HaGoylet, like I mentioned. He's got Tiferes Yisrael and Agdilas Yisrael, and he has a page on the Haggadah, and he's just got he wrote on Purim and Hanukkah. He's a mamash like a sifriya. He's got his own with people who've made Perishim on his for him. So there's a tremendous amount there. You can only scratch the surface, but Baruch Hashem, I've learned through a good number of them to get a feel for his approach. He's very, very analytical. He takes things apart, and he has his principles, and he applies them all over. And basically, he has a tremendous background in Kabbalah, but he doesn't speak about Kabbalah very openly. It's always like in the background, it's behind things, but he doesn't talk specifically. He doesn't use Kabbalah terminology. He doesn't go in depth into those kinds of things you would find in the Arizal or something. But the concepts, the background is all there, and the more Kabbalah the more you see it in things that he writes. But he is very systematic. I think in terms of how to deal with I chose a particular sefer called Netivot Olam, which is a good example of that. What I said about the Kabbalah being in the background, that the Netivot Olam is based on there are 32, actually 33 Netivos. He says himself in the introduction I'm going to read, is that Netivos Olam is 32 Netivos. Each one is like a way, a derech, and there's a 33rd one. He adds one for the Torah, so that's like above everything. But the Lamed Beis Netivos Chachma is mentioned in the Sefer Yetzirah. That's the makor for the idea of the Lamed Beis Netivos Chachma. So it's obvious what it's based on, but he doesn't say that outwardly. It's just, this is 32 Netivos. If you know what it means, good. If you don't, so whatever. But it's I'm going to kind of paraphrase it, I think, as opposed to reading it and translating it, unless somebody specifically wants me to do it that way. But I think it's probably better to do it like this. So anyway, so the Netivos Olam is a very, very broad sefer, and just as he explains it himself, he's just basically taking Musar. A lot of it's taken from Pirkei Avos and other psukim and Mishlei and various Sfurim, to get an overview of basic topics in Yiddishkeit. It's it's basically a list of all the major subjects that a person could imagine. Torah, Avodah, Tzedakah, whatever. It's a whole list. What?
We didn't hear just what the different categories.
The categories.
No, you just said them now.
What?
You just said the different.
No, I'm just off the top of my head. I'm just mentioning a few things that he deals with. But the first one we'll deal with now is Torah. But he takes a very broad subject and he goes into it, and he into going over the things that is said about it. But it's not like there's a sefer Noyes Amor, which is a collection of Agadita on various subjects, and basically he just takes he basically quotes the sources, and it's very good because you get all that stuff in one place. But it was a very popular sefer. But we started out, we were learning that, if you remember that. But he doesn't add anything of his own, really. Whereas the Maharal is all about the way he combines it, how he takes out certain things, and he has his own approach to every subject. So that's really what's unique about the Maharal. He's not just a collection of quotations. He's mamish finding a way to deal with it and how to explain it. Okay, so by the way, is there a clock here, by the way? I just want to be able to keep track of where I am here. Okay, so first he has an Akdama, which is good to go through as a basic orientation. Basically, what he's explaining first is the whole reason why he took this concept of Nesivas. A Nesiva is a path. And the Maharal, we'll see here, he is very involved in, he brings out many of his form, this concept of the derech ha-yusher, that there is a path that a person is expected to take over the course of his lifetime, and he should not deviate from that path. He's talking about basically kind of a middle road. He's not talking, the whole idea is that he doesn't want to go to extremes. So he's always concerned that if a person deviates from the norm, from the path that the Torah shows us, not the norm of whatever he's doing, the norm in terms of what the Torah is telling us, this is the proper way to approach, this subject that we're dealing with, in terms of behavior and a path to choose how to go through life. There is a consistency to it. There's a seichel to it and a consistency. It's definable, and it's something that a person should not deviate from. And he talks about the differences between certain paths are narrower and certain paths are broader. So some allow a little more room for deviation, but some of them have to be very precise. So it's a very systematic approach. He's not talking about just following your whims or how you happen to feel on a particular day or something like that. He's saying in each area of life, which is basically what this covers, he's talking about how to approach it in a way that is going to give you a path throughout life. Life is a journey. And this whole mashal is a journey. It's you're going to go through life dealing with any given subject in a multitude of environments, a multitude of different situations. And the challenge is to be able to navigate those challenges with some kind of a derech. In other words, if a person, for example, if a person has a destination that he's trying to get to, if he goes there without a map or without a driver or somebody that knows how to get there and is going to get there in the shortest possible time, the most efficient possible way, he's going to be floundering around, and he's sometimes he might end up, taking a wrong turn, going backwards, getting lost, getting totally messed up. You have to deal with these things. You can't just, without preparation, just set out and hope for the best. And basically, if a person is dealing with life as being something with a tachlis and something with a purpose and something with a meaning and something with an expectation of going from point A to point B without getting too messed up and without getting to the place where he's supposed to go to. So he's talking about a very systematic and seichelic way of doing that. The problem is today, and it's every time I think about this, I get like I'm kind of amazed that the world is still around, because when we see what's happened certainly over the last 100 years, is there has been such a dissolution of any kind of stability and any kind of principles and morals and definitions and assumptions and everything else over the course of, let's say, the past 100 years or so. It's been breaking away and breaking away and breaking away to the point where now today we have the most basic assumptions of society are being eroded and questioned and thrown away altogether. So it's like the opposite of seichel. It is, and the more the universities get involved, the less seichel we have. So it's like the world is starting to go in reverse, basically. And you're going backwards on it. And that's why there's this polarization and all the obfuscation and all the false news and everything else, because people have lost the sense of what is truth. They've lost their moral yardstick, so to speak. There are no assumptions. It used to be that if your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, your life was based on a more or less consistent assumptions and some kind of a stable foundation, and when everything came into question, then all these things started getting all these assumptions and all the things we take for granted about civilized living basically are falling away. So that's why it's so important in our generation. I mean, we're all most of us are from the kind of older generation here. So, but we weren't brought up in this kind of hefker, step society. But something, still from our parents. But in this kind of a generation we're in now, the Maharal is so important, because he's laying down the groundwork. He is giving us, the basis on which to build something and base something, because maybe you didn't need it as badly when we had so much by osmosis and we had so much that we just kind of assumed the assumptions were there. But today, when everything's questioned and everything is being thrown out, you need somebody to show you, no, this is really what you have to do. This is the way you have to live if you want it to come out, to be looking something by the end of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he says, he brings a pasuk from Mishlei. It's be'oirech tzeduka chayim v'derech nesiva el maves. Okay, so he uses two words here. One is oirech and one is derech. So he says, when a person, this is taking a person based on the concept of tzedakah, right? So if a person is giving tzedakah, so if he is giving tzedakah, he says he has chayim. So what does it mean, chayim, in a very broad sense? This is also a concept. The idea that a person has a life, that life is something. Life is something that we can aspire to. There is a difference between life and death in life itself. You can live without living, and you can live even chas v'shalom in a state of death. Life and death is not the fact that your heart is beating or it's not beating. Life or death is whether you are experiencing life the way life is meant to be lived, or you're experiencing death within life. And we know this because it says that the tzaddikim are called alive when they're dead, and Rishonim are called dead when they're alive. So obviously, life and death is not just talking about whether your heart is beating or not. It's talking about whether you're experiencing life or not. So he says that this idea of tzedukah, when you give tzedukah to a poor person, then you are giving life to the poor person. Whereas the poor person's life is not a life because he can't sustain himself. He's worried about where his next penny is coming from. He doesn't have what to eat. You're mamish by giving him something, giving life. I just saw an article today, something about a soldier or somebody felt like he was dying, and somebody gave him a meal, and he felt like he gave him life. So he experienced life. He was enlivened by the fact that somebody gave him a meal. So that's basically what you're doing for a poor person. You're giving them a meal, and I know the poor people today are a little different than the poor people of that time, but basically you're giving life. So that's the experience that the person what they're feeling. Besides, you're giving him that tzedakah. You gave me, you enlivened me. I was dying, and you gave me life. It could be just hope or whatever it is. Okay, so that's the idea of giving life to the poor person. So because you were machaya the ani, you were giving him life. So therefore you get life back. It's rui, it's appropriate that you should get life back for the fact that you gave life to somebody else. Because ultimately things, what goes around comes around. But you get from giving, you get something back. That's inevitable. It's not that you're giving in order to get, but you do get because the fact that that's the way Hashem runs it. He gives you back what you give to somebody else. Okay, so he says that the derech nesiva. So what's the derech nesiva? Is to movis, to death. What does that mean? So he says the idea is, and here he's talking about this idea of what causes death within life. If a person is on a path and he knows where he's going, and he has, as we said, the tools to be able to navigate that path, that journey, then he is in a way of life, right? We're talking about a way of life. He's ascribing to a set of principles, a lifestyle, a certain derech in how he's living. So therefore, as long as he stays on that path, he's staying in the way of life. But if he deviates from that path, then he's going off of the path, and that it's like as if there's this path of life going in the middle, and all around it is death. And he's very much, basically, he's talking about this a few times. You guys will remember this idea about that he says that daytime is light, and that's life. Night is dark, and that's death. Because when, at least in his days, when it was nighttime and it was dark, it was completely dark. You didn't see anything, right? You had to light a light in order to see anything, unless it was like a bright moon or something. But b'derech klal, it was like the world didn't exist at night. So what he's saying is that as long as you know where you're going, and you have your principles, and you have this road that you're on the road, and you know where you're going, so then you can assume that you're participating in life the way it's supposed to be lived. But if you deviate from that path, you're going basically to an extreme, rather than being in the middle road, which is the well-beaten path, the way that that humanity is supposed to be going in. You know where you are. Once you start to deviate from that path and go off, then it's not to be taken lightly. You can't just experiment with things like that. You can get because as soon as you leave that beaten path where you know that this is the right way to do it, this is the way that you've been generations and generations. The Torah itself is telling you this is the way to do it, and you think, oh well, maybe I'll try this or I'll try that, or maybe I don't have to know so well where I'm going and what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, right? So then what?
Then you get lost.
Yeah. And if you get lost, that's sakonas defushes. You're going up, you don't know where you're going to end up, And we know people. Unfortunately, we have friends. We know people that it didn't start, with immediately, all of a sudden going completely off the derech, so to speak. We talk off the derech. What does it mean? Away from the path. So it didn't happen overnight. It started with a little thing here and a little thing there, but one leads to, Avera Guderis Avera, things, one thing follows the other. And that's really what it is, because it's a beautiful mashal, the idea of going off a path. Because when you go off the path at the beginning, it looks like you're just going off a little bit. But if you keep going in that wrong direction, unless you make a conscious effort to get back on the path, if you start going that wrong direction, little by little, you get further and further and further away from the regular path, until you're so far away that you don't really realize how far you've gotten. And then that's like, then you'd see that then all of a sudden, the difference between being on the path and being off the path is life and death. Because now you're in a place where you don't know where you are, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know why you're doing it, but you've become so entrenched you may not even know how to get back to the path that you started from. And then it's I don't want to say too late, but it's big trouble. Anyway, so he says that the idea is not to deviate right or left from this path that you're on. So this is the idea of the yosher, and not to go away from the yosher, not to be noite ela kutze, he says, not to go to lean towards one of the extremes, one of the sides, that's not on the path itself. So when it's talking about tzedakah, it uses this word oirech as opposed to nesiva. So he says oirech is a wide path. That means that because why is a wide path? Because it's not so specific. You don't have to give tzedakah all the time. You don't have to give even to everybody who asks you. So sometimes you give and sometimes you don't give. So there's a certain leeway. There's a certain flexibility there that the Torah is not telling you have to give to everyone. So that's the difference on Purim. It says you have to give to everyone. So the rest of the time you don't have to. You make your choices. So that's that. There you have room to work with. You can decide this time yes, this time no. Now I have money. Now I don't have money. I can you can make a budget. Whatever it is, you have what to work with. But there are other types of paths where it's a much narrower type of path, and those types of paths you're not allowed to deviate even a little bit. He says he uses an example of that, the idea of justice, mishpat. So if a person is a judge, or somebody, or a person paskin halacha, or something like that, a dayan, these kinds of people, they have to know exactly what din is, and they have to be very exacting to make sure that they're not making mistakes, because if they make a mistake, that could affect other people, and that they're not allowed to even once not be sure that what they're saying is correct. So their path, that their leeway that they have to go with is much narrower. So that's an example of a narrow path as opposed to a wide path. So he says that tzedakah is also something that a lot of people do. So therefore, because it's a well-trodden path, it's something that because a lot of people do it, so it's part of the world. It's something that it's not unfamiliar. And everybody has their own particular ways of doing it. Whatever it's a well-discussed area. It's a lot of talk about it, the skonim and everything else. So there's a lot going on in that area, right? Of tzedakah and charity, all this kind of stuff. But there are other things that are not maybe so well trodden, and there also it makes it narrower. That's much more difficult to get around it. There's a whole thing here. I don't think we're going to get into about the it talks about the isha. There's isha's chayil and isha's zura. Talks about the choimer.
It's interesting that the biggest issue we had before the war was the Indian of judges and the justice system.
Right. Okay, so I don't have too much time left, so I'll go here to the end of it more or less. So he talks about this idea of weighing mitzvahs of the Torah, that you have to weigh the decisions, and you also have to weigh the idea of schar v'oinish. You have to weigh your decisions, which things you're going to concentrate your efforts into. And this is also something that takes a certain amount of thought and preparation and decision-making and seichel to weigh and measure your options and what is, because within Torah itself you have different options. So you have to weigh how much you're willing to invest in something, how much time, how much effort are you willing to put into something, as opposed to the cost involved, as opposed to the benefits involved. This idea of schar b'oinish. So those are also areas that force us to evaluate what we're going to get involved with and how we're going to stay on this particular path. Whereas if a person's just a slave to his tithus, so he is depending on more impulsive decisions, where his behavior is more run by what he happens to feel like at the moment or what happens to look good for him at the time, without this idea of weighing and measuring the alternatives of what is really the proper thing to do in any situation. So again, he's always talking about this, being able to look at the long run, look at what's sustainable, look at what makes sense in the context of all the alternatives available, this kind of thing. So it's not something to be just rushed into various things. So then he says basically that his approach here is to collect different things, a lot of the statements from Pirkei Avos particularly, and to put them together on specific subjects, and to put them all into one place so they're accessible. And the first one, as I said, there are these base nesivos divided into 32 subjects, and then he's got nesiv echad, one particular thing to talk about, the limud haTorah, the Indian of limud Torah. That's his first subject. That's the 33rd path that he's going to go in, and that's what we're going to start with next week.
Could you give us a sneak preview of what kind of paths he's talking about?
Which are the subjects?
Yeah.
I don't have the index here, so I don't.
But from memory.
I don't really remember all the ones. Next week can be a decision. But
next week.
okay.
Okay.
Shkoyach.